In this video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of rent control, specifically for landlords. So hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so you stay up to date on when new videos come out. A record number of Americans, more than 43 million households according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, now rent homes rather than own them. However, that increase in demand hasn't been met with a similar increase in supply. Research by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, JCHS, found that although 6.7 million housing units were added to the market between 2005 and 2015, the vast majority of those homes were designed to accommodate only the smallest and wealthiest portion of the rental population. Units renting for less than $800 a month declined by 2%, while units renting for $2,000 or more a month increased by a whopping 97%. There's no question that affordable rental housing is in short supply relative to demand. How to answer that demand is less clear-cut, which is making rent control a key issue in cities across the US. Rent control policies take different forms in different states, but here are the general pros and cons of such legislation that landlords should keep in mind when considering the potential impact of these measures on their business. So let's first look at the benefits of rent control for landlords. Number 1, lower tenant turnover. A study by Stanford University on the effects of rent control in San Francisco found that rent control policies limited renters' mobility by 20% and decreased population displacement from the city. A stable population of renewing, responsible renters is a good thing for landlords, who then can save on the cost of reletting units and avoid the risks that come with adding new, unknown tenants to the building. That said, the policies also had unintended adverse effects, faced with limits on profit potential. Many of the city's landlords opted to convert their units to condos, sell to owner-occupants, or redevelop their buildings, thus reducing the city's rental housing stock by 15%. Number 2, lowered financial burdens help tenants meet expectations. In a perfect world for a do-it-yourself landlord, rent payments would arrive on time and in full every month. When nearly half of the nation's renters are already allocating 30% or more of their housing income to rent, and more than half of those allocating 50% or more of their income to rent, the financial burden of housing makes it difficult for families to afford other necessities such as food, clothing, transportation, and medical care. Keeping rental rates predictable and in check makes it easier for renters to budget successfully and pay on schedule. Without rent control, landlords could increase rent by a more substantial margin, but in doing so, they could also jeopardize their income by pricing good tenants out of a home. Number 3, less development means less competition. Rent control has been shown to be a disincentive for development companies to build new units in the area. With less development, the demand for existing units go up, meaning lower vacancy rates and a larger pool of potential tenants. It also means it's less likely that a shiny new complex with upgraded finishes and features will lure existing renters away. So what are the disadvantages of rent control for landlords? Number 1, rent control puts a ceiling on profitability. Because rent control imposes a limit on how, when, and by how much landlords can raise the rent, it puts a cap on their profit potential even in a hot market. However, by incentivizing tenants to stay put on the long term, the lower profit margin can be offset by the reduced number of time and hard costs for landlords when it comes to turning a unit over between rents. Number 2, bad tenants stay put too. Just as good tenants are incentivized to renew their lease in rent-controlled cities, not so good tenants are as well. Rent control policies frequently include provisions that make it more difficult to evict tenants, which can be problematic if a legitimate need for eviction arises. Number 3, rent control policies sometimes forget the impact of property taxes. In the Freakonomics podcast focused on rent control, Vicky Bean, a former commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing and Preservation and Development and current professor of the NYU Law School, says rent control policies don't always take into account how changes in property taxes can burden landlords with rent-controlled units. In New York City, for example, a very high percentage of rent goes for property taxes. So we can't be saying to landlords, hey, keep prices down, but by the way, your property taxes just went up by 10%. Bean says for cities considering overhauls of existing rent control laws or implementing new policies, the impact of property taxes on rents has to be a consideration. These tax-paying bodies have an obligation to understand the effect that those increases may have on rents, and we can't just turn around and say to the landlord, you absorb them, right? Don't pass them on to the tenants because that's an unsustainable system. Now, this is obviously a hot topic. Rent control policies are designed to keep housing within reach for middle and lower income families. But those policies fall short when they neglect to consider the interests of landlords and property owners who maintain such homes. Remember that rent control has the greatest potential for success when it considers renters and property owners alike, and good policy comes from active public participation. So what are your thoughts as a landlord? I know the thoughts for people who rent, but how about for landlords? Leave a comment down below and let's start a discussion. And as always, take care of your money. Oh, and one last thing before you go. I created a course called Smart Money Parenting as a way to teach parents how to educate their kids about money. An early financial education is the foundation for wealth building, so give your kids a future they deserve. Use code MONEY20 at checkout to receive 20% off my master course. I'll leave a link to the course down below.